I'm Robin Kimbrough Melton. On behalf of the Global Alliance for Behavioral Health and Social Justice and the Mental Health section of the American Public Health Association, I'm pleased to welcome you to this presentation, Youth Wellbeing in a Digital World, the Role of Schools and Communities. Thank you for being here today. I'd like to take a minute to thank our partners for making this presentation possible. Mike Delaney and his team at the Nebraska Council of School Administrators brought this film to our attention. If it had not been for them, we wouldn't be here today. And Nebraska Loves Public Schools. They've created the Mind Inside docuseries, but they've also just been indispensable in getting this project off the ground. By way of introduction today, let me just say that we're in the last week of National Mental Health Month. The month of May is a time when we raise awareness of the importance of mental health in our lives and the role of everyone in our communities in creating environments that are supportive of mental well-being. I can't think of a better way to explore this critically important issue of social media on the mental health of youth than to view this film. After we see the film, our distinguished panel, and we hope all of you, will discuss some of the more salient issues in the film. I encourage you to put your questions in the chat at any time during the film or during the panel discussion. Now I have the honor of introducing the Executive Director of Nebraska Loves Public Schools and the interviewer and director of the film, Sally Nelson Barrett. Sally has interviewed literally hundreds of people and directed more than 30 films to raise awareness about the high quality of public education in Nebraska. In viewing this film, you'll quickly see that Sally is a storyteller. She uses film to draw attention to the challenges experienced by youth in our schools today. And in doing so, raises our awareness of the challenges that those people who work with youth, school teachers, guidance counselors, administrators, principals, they also are affected by what's going on with youth. It's critically important as we think about viewing this film that we understand the role of our role in supporting schools and our role as community members in supporting the youth. There's nothing that is more critical than doing that. I'm pleased to introduce Sally Nelson Barrett, and I hope you'll enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Robin. We are so honored to have the opportunity to share our work with you. For the last 10 years, we have been connecting people with the humanity of public schools through film and storytelling. All of our films are distributed on our website and through social media and through venues like this. Our objective is to really create films and stories that spark conversation. About 4 years ago, I was at a conference with a handful of superintendents that represented the entire state of Nebraska. We were screening a film, and when I was finished, I said, before I leave, could everyone just write down on a piece of paper for me the top 3 issues that your school district faces? Every single one of them put mental health as the number 1. So we decided that we would try to tackle this issue as a film. And once we got in and started talking to people, I quickly realized that there's no way you can cover mental health in a film. So we decided to do a series. And the series, as Robin said, is called The Mind Inside. We have 3 episodes that are available now. This is our 2nd episode. We think it's critically important that we connect parents, especially with what's happening with their kids. And so I'm a mom of 3 teenage daughters, and there's so much that happens that sadly we're not aware of. In hopes of being able to prevent suicide, we just want to share this film and spark lots of conversation. So with that, again, I thank you so much for the opportunity to share our work with you, and I hope you enjoy the film.
There was a crisis team call pretty early in the morning to come to the alumni conference room, which is where we convene at the high school. And so when I came in, I said, "What happened? What's going on?" And everybody sat silent and just looked at me. And it felt like it took everything for the assistant principal to just say it. And when he said it, it kind of hit me in a way that I couldn't hear it. I remember it just being really, I said, no. And then it was just really devastating. It was hard.
So I had him in a first period class, and that day he was absent. And second period, our assistant principal came up and pulled me into the hall and told me. And this class that was in here at that time were all friends, same grade level, same type class that he was in first period, advanced 9th grade English. And I knew there were lots of friends in there. And when it was loud, I broke down. It was a loud scene in the hall. So then I had to come back in, and we told these kids.
My son was Reed Christian Adler, and he was the victim of cyberbullying and intimidation from one student, a fellow student of his, that led him to make the decision to take his own life based upon a mistake that he made. And the struggle that we've had with that over the years is we all make mistakes, and no mistake is so big that we can't wrap our arms around it and learn from the mistake and take that learning forward.
What happened with Reed was probably one of the most devastating days of DJing my life, probably. I think because Reed occupied the same breath and the same space and the same air that I did. He reminded me a lot of my son. So that was painful to digest.
Unfortunately, Reed used a permanent solution for a temporary situation. And he's changed the landscape of our family, our community, and our school forever. And I wished that he didn't take that impulse decision, but we can't go back.
I think from that moment on, always wanted to create an environment where my students will always know I love them. And it's hard because there are some students who, no matter how many times you are real with them and you prove that you're willing to do anything to help them and you're an advocate for them, they will disappoint you, they will hurt you, they will lash out at you. And we always say we just love them harder. We just love them harder.
What's up, Danny? What's up, man? Okay, yes. Hey, Haley. Yep, got it. You do? You don't?
I'm very grateful that cell phones, electronics, the internet, social media wasn't there when I was growing up. I'm not sure if my path would be the same.
Raise your hand if you have a phone. how old were you when you got a phone?
I was in 4th grade when I got a phone.
I think it was my 8th grade year. It was right between the 2 semesters. I got it for my birthday. It was after much complaining.
For today's kids, that phone and the social connectivity that comes along with it is almost a necessity to them. And many times, even with my own child, I have a 15-year-old boy and an 11-year-old boy, and even with them, they would take any punishment that I would give them as long as I didn't take their phone away.
What is the longest period of time that you have gone since you've been in middle school without having a phone, an iPad, a laptop?
Like,
including the weekends and...
5 days?
5 days. And how was that for you?
It was pretty easy.
Okay. What about you?
An hour.
An hour's the longest you've ever gone?
Yes.
When I was in 3rd grade, I would play on the playground and I would talk to kids and I would go on play dates. But now kids have these brand new iPhones. They're just scrolling through social media, using TikTok or whatever the new thing is now. I just don't think it's good mentally for them or physically as well, you know?
Back in middle school, well, I had 3 Instagram accounts. Two of them I still have. One of them I just deleted because that one I was just kind of ashamed of, honestly. And that was the one I deleted was my very first Instagram account. And when I posted my very first picture, I started getting followers and likes. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that feels really good. And so on the next one, I just put on some hashtags follow for follow and those cringy hashtags, and it felt really good just getting more likes and more followers.
Social media is a very complicated topic. The biggest problem is that it's happening right now in front of us. We didn't even know what this was 10, 20 years ago. We're starting to see that certain trends are becoming viable for us to recognize. Specifically, there are advantages to social media, both in terms of connecting with people and learning about things.
I see us, as a complete generation, being more connected than any other generation before. Since we have our phones and everything, and since we're on technology and things like that let us talk to people all day, we're more connected with people that are outside our own little circles, and we get to learn about other people's experiences, other people's views on things without having to physically meet them. And I think there's a lot of benefits to that as opposed to just having the physical interactions, which would be your little small circle that you normally have.
Unfortunately, the downside that we're starting to see is too often kids identify what kind of person they are by how they're perceived. And so concretely, a big issue that we see right now with kids is they gauge their life by the number of likes that they get on social media sites.
When I was in middle school, I started a few fan pages for a few pop culture things that I was really into at that time. It became sort of my life. And so all I would think about was what am I gonna post next? How many likes am I getting? I felt as though if I didn't post for a day or interact on the internet for a day, I would lose everything. And it became a very kind of, in my opinion, unhealthy obsession. And so I started to realize that oh wait, I'm literally living on my phone all the time. I get home and literally all I see is screen. It's hurting my eyes. I can't focus anymore.
We've all talked about it, seen the posts about, the presentation of your online life is always so much better than the reality of it.
So you're flipping through Instagram and you're seeing, all your friends, especially over Christmas vacation and summer vacation, you're look where they are. They're in Fiji, or they're at the zoo, or they're at a sleepover, or they're at this, or they're at that.
They could just be there. It could just be a fake photo and be someone from the internet. Or it could just be them going to the zoo once in a year.
For adults, sometimes it's even hard to get that perspective. Well, when you're on that roller coaster of adolescence, there's no perspective a lot of times. And everybody's life seems better. Everything seems better.
The pressure to be perfect is really hard.
And who sets that bar for perfect? Like, how do you know if you've achieved it?
It like goes down a chain. It's like, you know, you got like your Kardashian level of like high-end superstar, like this is what it's like, and then it trickles down to like in your area, like who's really popular, and then you have, you know, like that one really popular girl at school that has like 2,000-3,000 followers and everyone wants to be like her, and then like that's the standard for your school.
Well, there's no denying the social media aspect and how that has influenced the mental health of kids and has exacerbated the reactions and yeah, you break up with a boyfriend or something happens and you can't get away from it.
Good morning, people. Good morning. How we doing today? Great. Good. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to continue our discussion. When I first started teaching, come in, students, open your books, let's learn. And the student was more engaged and they were more focused. Now they want to be entertained, which is fun. But it chips away at, I think, you know, that content learning because you're competing against the phone.
Good. If they side with one another, what group said this one? Okay, can you tell me a little bit about what you meant?
Some of the things that I'm seeing just day to day are social media being paramount. I mean, we have kids coming in that are being bullied on social media. We have kids that are saying things on social media that they won't say face-to-face with their friends. When we get them into mediation, they can have a good conversation and come to an agreement. But when they're on social media, the things they say are horrific. When we read them back to them, sometimes they can't believe they said those things because they're so mean and horrible.
Have you ever been hurt by something you've seen on social media?
I think that everyone has been hurt by something that they've seen on social media.
Just not everybody necessarily speaks up about it or like says that it hurt them. We do a really good job of just, because it's easier to just swipe past something than to type something out. Instead of like what my grandma would do is she'd go on there and type a paragraph of how she feels, and then all these people are commenting about how they don't agree with her or they do. We do a lot better job of just swiping past.
You swipe past it, but does that swipe the feeling away?
No.
You have a bad day, you post about it, or someone like really like made you mad, you post about it, and then if you're that person, you see it, and I don't know, it hurts. And like you said, you can swipe past it, but you still kind of sit on it and you think, oh, well, I don't know what I did to make this person so mad, and I mean, it always hurts, no matter what.
We've also seen, unfortunately, a linear relationship with the amount of time that people spend on social media and their inclination to feel despondent, depressed, and anxious. So the more time you spend, the more likely you are to feel discouraged and negative about things.
Well, anytime you're dealing with a population of people, and certainly teenagers, you're dealing with all sorts of levels of mental health, qualities of mental health. And I think for me, in an English classroom, especially where there's a lot of writing and where there's opportunities to share things and to explore things, I think we have an insight into kids' mental health status and what children share, what they experience, and the challenges as a teacher has changed a lot in the 32 years because of that.
Some of the things that I deal with on a daily basis are students who are writing about killing themselves.
So what happens when they do things like fail a test, they are absolutely, unabashedly, like, devastated, as if everything, I mean, we're talking about kids that have taken high-level classes all the way through. They take an AP Calc class and they fail their first test. I realize it's a little devastating, but the level of devastation is a lot higher than we've seen before. I mean, they go straight to, I want to kill myself. You know, it's just a test.
I think that the romanticization of mental illness on social media is making our discussion of mental illness itself, like depression, a lot less serious. We see that in social media when people like joke about suicide whenever they're like sad. So like they call themselves depressed even though they're sad for like a few days. So I think that calling that depression, first of all, is an appropriation of what depression actually is. And then further in our memes or entertaining little posts that are meant to make us laugh, we see one negative thing happen to a person in that post, and then that person will say, I want to die. And so that takes away the seriousness of the issue of suicide and mental illness in our culture. And I think that's part of the reasons why it's getting worse, because it's not a serious thing anymore, it's a joke.
I think the hardest part of it is, it's a horrible thing, but so many people just joke about it. Like, oh, I failed the test, oh, that's it, guys, I'm going home and I'm doing it. Like, it's so hard to discern when it's true and when it's not. And then when it is genuine, it's, okay, do I talk to them? Do I talk to the counselor? Like, are they gonna be mad at me if I talk to someone about this? It's just so hard, especially because, people don't like to talk about it.
And people are probably, like, embarrassed to talk about it.
And when you say it, are you talking about suicide or depression or what?
Yeah, all of it.
All of it, yeah.
We can't talk about our feelings?
You get kind of ridiculed for talking about your feelings because people we don't care.
You're supposed to be happy. That's the picture. So.
And that's what society expects?
Yeah.
What about your parents?
That's a whole nother thing.
Yeah. It's like my mom, like, she tells me, it's okay, we can talk about things. And then the first sign of me, like, being sad, it's like, oh, what's wrong? Like, we need to get you out of this. Like, it's just hard for people to understand. Sometimes you're just not okay, and that's not a bad thing. You'll get through it, but you don't always have to be happy.
Sometimes parents or adults or anyone that you're talking to, it can be a big deal to you, but when you say it out loud, it sounds dumb, and it might sound dumb to them or like small. So you just kind of hide it. So then, because that's like another way that it's embarrassing. Like, it's a big deal to you, but it's not to anyone else.
And like with the embarrassing part, I feel like it's embarrassing to ask for help.
Yeah.
Is the biggest thing with us is, I don't know, we feel like even when you have a question with math, you're like, do I go up to the teacher or do I just sit here and try to figure it out myself? Yeah.
Asking.
So when it comes to something much bigger than like a math problem, it's kind of embarrassing to ask for help.
It's difficult for kids. It's difficult for kids right now. They have a lot more pressure, a lot more on their plate, a lot more expectation than maybe we had when we were younger.
It's 4 years of probably one of the roughest parts of your life where you feel like you want to conform, but you don't want to conform because you don't want to be a conformist, but you do. You want to be loved, you want to be liked, and you're trying to work through the social part as well as your body is changing.
Trying to figure out who you are.
You're trying to figure out who you are. It's huge.
Yeah.
And then they're plopped into your classroom, and I'm going to teach you some dates and some times and some people, and I want you to care about it. That's a joke. That's a joke. So you can't teach them unless you know them.
The front part of the brain, the part that you're using to like make sense out of things, yeah, that kind of gets turned down when you go into adolescence. They turn up the emotional part of their brain. It's called the amygdala. But the point of the story is, so basically you're speaking German when you talk to adults and you're speaking to someone who speaks French around the kids. Everything they process through this emotional channel. And so you would go, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would kids do that at this age? Well, their job from time immemorial to this moment is to look up when they're about 12 to 20 and start going, yeah, this person's attractive. Yeah, that person's attractive. And so it's not built on, well, rationally, this would be a good mate for me. This is a person who has the right kind of personality, and yeah, I think they look good. Our kids would be able to play sports, and she likes music. They don't think like that. It's like, oh, they're hot, so they get attracted, so they can do the really developmentally difficult job of separating from their parents as they affix to their peers and other people that they're attracted to. So this emotional part, first off, makes it very hard to have a conversation because it's like frontal lobe, amygdala.
Teens, in general, tend to isolate.
Every day my mom would be like, come watch this movie with me. And like me being a teenager, I just want to sit in my bed and be on my phone. And like, I feel horrible for it, but like, it's just something that I enjoy.
But it's hard for parents to know, is this depression? Not participating in the family, not going outside of the house, being on your phone all the time, in your room all the time, or is that just being a teen?
Our next guest, Dr. Mark and Joni Adler. Dr. Adler is the superintendent for Ralston Public Schools. He and his wife are leaders in the community, and they have been touched by this topic of bullying in a profound way. And I would like to let them tell you about Reed and Reed's story. Please help me welcome Dr.
So Reed was an awesome kid. He was an athlete, he was smart, he was a great kid, but Reed wasn't perfect. And what we didn't know was, when Reed was in middle school, he took a picture of himself that was inappropriate of his midsection. Didn't show his face, any part of his body, but did show his midsection with no clothes on. He shared that with a girl. We think for 9 or 10 months, that girl held that over Reed's head. If you don't do this or this, I'm going to share this out on social media. I know this will embarrass you. And we feel like what happened, and we've had to piece this together, and it's taken a while. We feel like Reed had had enough. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to continue to let you harass me. And so we think he quit communicating with her and said, I'm not going to communicate with you anymore, and it made her mad. And on January 6th, she held up her end of the deal, and she shared it on social media. She shared that picture of Reed on a website called Omaha Purge, and then it all went from there. Earlier that night, Reed finished his homework, and Reed was a great kid, but he also was a kid that, you know, if he was not going to school the next day, I'll guarantee he's not going to be doing his homework. So he kind of went by the seat of his pants on some of that stuff, but he had finished all his homework, and that's when we think this was an impulse decision. That what happened that night was Reed's worst nightmare came true. She posted that, and he didn't know what to do. And so his answer was he would just take his own life.
There's very few things that don't get captured, you know, with a video or a picture, and then that comes back around, and it's that constant reminder, if it isn't a positive thing, of what's not right with you.
We had no idea this was going on with all these kids, and it wasn't just him. But we had no idea these kids were being tortured like this. Now at least we do. Now at least, for the most part, we get kids that come in and say, hey, this girl's doing this to me on social media.
Do you know if any of your friends have been asked to send inappropriate photos?
Yeah, I used to live in Lincoln, and there was this girl that her pictures and videos and stuff like got sent out to everybody, and then she like didn't come to school for a while. So
Do you know why she would have taken inappropriate videos?
No. I mean, people ask probably.
I had a friend that happened to too. She came to dance crying one time, and I sat her down and we're like, "What's wrong?" She's like, "He said if I break up with him, he's gonna release my nudes to the entire school." And it was a moment of like, she did it because she thought she needed to, because that's, I mean, a lot of kids think like that's
pressure.
Yeah, that's a big part of relationships. Like that's just what you do. If that stuff gets out, I mean, it's really hard to gain people's respect back.
There's a part of the brain, the ventral striatum, that gets activated during adolescence again so that you can kind of join your group, your peer group, and do stuff with them as you separate from your family. But that means that kids will do stupid, crazy stuff when they're 12 to about 25 or so, that they look up at the end of that time and go, "No, I'm not doing that," no matter what other people would encourage them to do. So they're just more vulnerable during that time.
Is there perhaps a time in your life when social media is really important and then you kind of grow out of it?
As you mature, or at least for me, as I've matured and like become more comfortable with myself, I feel like less of an urge to like get validation from social media.
And I think also in this sort of a situation, like we're being interviewed, we have cameras on us, not to break the fourth wall or anything. Like we have peers around us, so like we're not going to say like all the bad things we do, right? It's like there are definitely things about my usage of social media where like, you know, sometimes I can get caught up in a lot of things or like, you know, I spend way too much time on it. But I'm not gonna say that here, even though I just did say that. But like, I think we try and make ourselves look good in real life and online and just be like, no, that's not me. Like those are the other teenagers you've been hearing about.
The notion that kids will be kids, boys will be boys, girls will be girls. You know, this is just the new, you know, fight on the playground type of thing. I would push back on that, and I would say, no. The amount of exposure that students see of violence and manipulation and just things that I was never exposed to. We were never exposed to.
When kids are dealing with that constant need to impress people on social media, that constant need to be liked on social media and to not be attacked on social media, they never get away from it. At least we got away from it. We were able to go home and have a breather from all of that day-to-day stuff, but these kids don't. They go home and it's constant, it's still there, it's always there. It never goes away, they never turn it off. And that's gonna wear on you. That's gonna wear on anybody. That would wear on an adult.
Sounds like there's a lot of pressure on you guys. Do you feel that?
Yeah.
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks so much for joining I'm Sharon Hoover, and I co-direct the National Center for School Mental Health at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, and it's my pleasure to moderate this panel today. As you all just witnessed, the film really presented a poignant and moving portrait of youth mental health and suicide and the role of social media and technology as it relates to young people and mental health. And I want to just express my personal gratitude to Dr. Adler and the Adler family for sharing their personal story and pain in the interest of educating others, and to everyone who produced the film and participated in the film. And you're going to hear from two participants in the film today. I want to thank you all for lifting up these issues to increase awareness and hopefully create change. And I do want to especially thank today's four panelists for offering to speak with us today about youth mental health and well-being and social media and how we can create change and support in our schools and beyond. I'm going to ask our four panelists to introduce themselves in the chat box, actually, because you're going to hear from them directly, and we want to get right to it with some questions. But if our panelists could take a moment, if you can access the chat box, just enter your name and your role, that would be wonderful. And I'm going to go ahead and ask the same question of each of you to start. And I'll of course go one at a time, but I'll say the question first. So the question to think about is, what is the key issue that you feel needs to be addressed with regard to youth well-being in a digital world? And Cami, I'm going to start with you. We saw you in the film, and as a public schools teacher and as a mentor of young people, I'm curious for your perspective on the key issue that you feel needs to be addressed with regard to youth mental health in a digital world.
Well, first, thank you for having me. This is an important topic that's near and dear to my heart. I would say one of the first things is having a very honest, frank conversation. And that conversation starts with your students. As soon as I open the door to telling my students that I'm someone that they can trust, that I'm open, you would be surprised the amount of stories, just both comical and also sad, but just letting your students know that you care. But that also comes into the everyday stuff that you do in a classroom. A kid isn't going to trust you if they don't see you emulate that trust in those relationships with other people. So it's something that you have to do daily, and you have to constantly be open with your students to allow them the ability to come to you when they're ready.
I love it. Thank you so much, Cami. And as a mom of 3 teens myself, I would love for that message to be heard by all teachers, really, that it's so much about relationships and working to foster those in your classroom, in a school, and at home. So Connor, you were a high school student when this was filmed, and now a college student. And so I'm really interested in your perspective on what you feel is the key issue that needs to be addressed with regard to youth well-being in this digital world we're in.
Yes, I was a junior in high school when I was in the film, and it was such a fun opportunity to get to have. But I think one of the biggest things that we need to think about and really focus on when we're talking these hard conversations is really focusing on the students, because at the end of the day, that is who is impacted by all of our decisions, all of these things. And a huge part of that is understanding kind of the perspective of students. It's so easy, even for me, and I've only been removed from high school for a year, to think back on high school and be like, oh, high school kids, oh, it's so you don't have to go through that much. Your struggle, it's just so easy to minimize and kind of, and I know that was something I went through horribly, both with my parents and with my educators, was sometimes I was looked at and my problems were looked at as not real problems because they weren't adult problems. And that is really, really hard on a student, and it's really, really hard to have, be told that, and it makes your, not feel as important as you do. And then that makes these students' problems not feel like they can be voiced. And then they go unvoiced. And then that's when real dangers happen, both with like self-harm and suicide. I know a lot of my friends that like a lot of like issues are brought about by kind of the minimalizing and not focusing on our students. So I think it's just so important to remember at the end of the day, that is why we're here. We're here to educate these youths. That was not correct.
That was great, Connor. That was really great. And honestly, I think that message of really creating space for hearing the youth voice around what is going on with them, and not just creating that space and listening, but really then validating that what is a real problem or concern or issue for a young person is real for them. And I love how you said, just because it's not an adult problem doesn't mean it's not a significant problem for us, right? So well said, and thank you for sharing that perspective. So Dr. Caitlin, as an assistant professor at the University of Connecticut School of Social Work and also a principal investigator, I understand, on a CDC project to design core components of health supports for youth to navigate these social media conflicts in a digital world. I'm really curious through your lens as well, what would you say is the most kind of critical need to be addressed with regard to youth mental health? Seeing an audio issue. Are others able to hear Caitlin?
Can you hear me now?
Okay. We sure can. We knew there would be a moment.
Sorry about that. So I really echo what Cami and Connor mentioned. And one of the things that I'd love to add to that discussion, and it's something that Cami gestured to in the documentary, is that social media really does change the nature of so many peer interactions. We know that social media platforms are designed to be addictive, that the product is our attention. And so, so much of the experience on social media that I have heard from youth in my work is that things like the constant availability, the public nature of conflict or experiences online, the fact that you can quantify how many people are following or have liked a comment or a photo that you've posted, and then combine that with the sensitivity during adolescence where, young people are very peer-oriented and care very deeply about what their peers think, it can be incredibly difficult to pull out of or perhaps gain perspective on something that might seem small to the outsider. And so, thinking about how we handle these experiences online as adults in a community, support young people, I really echo what Cami mentioned, the importance of having close, trusted relationships with adults, because really, I think it's only in that context that young people might be comfortable sharing a difficult experience online. And really what Connor said is something that has come out in my own research as well, that, a lot of things sometimes start out as very small online and can blow up very quickly. And so that trusting relationship with adults in young people's world is so important in terms of taking young people's experiences seriously. And just because something doesn't seem to be serious to the adult, really listening and believing that those experiences are real. Making space in the classroom, as Cami, it sounds like does, making space in the school curriculum for young people to talk about their experiences online is a really important part of supporting young people's health in a digital world.
Great, thank you so much. So emphasizing again the power of relationships here. I loved in the film that Cami's expression around, you can't teach a student if you don't know the student, and really creating that space for students to feel safe sharing is critical and does rely on relationships. So finally, Brianna is a senior research analyst at the University of Chicago and an expert in suicide prevention. Again, curious perspective on what you believe to be, the greatest need with respect to youth well-being in a digital world right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said already, and I would echo the point about helping adults understand that these issues that might seem trivial to youth might be very serious to them, even if it's something as simple as a breakup or something mean that they saw on social media. And when it comes to suicide prevention, training and educating staff and parents and students on mental health and warning signs for suicide and how those should really be taken seriously. Even if someone is looking out for attention on social media, that is still them reaching out for help. They're hurting and something is bothering them. So helping them understand that what you put on social media, should be taken seriously. And maybe there are other ways that you should be reaching out for help, more safer ways to reach out for help, like reaching out to a trusted adult or having safe spaces in the classroom for students to talk about their issues.
That's great. Thank you. And that actually really does lead us into our next question. And I'm actually going to start with Caitlin this time. What do you think schools can do to help students become better citizens on social media? I know there's digital citizen classes or modules, but real specific ideas for what schools can do here. Again, we can't hear you, so go ahead and unmute.
So sorry.
Okay. I can hear you now.
15 months into the pandemic, still getting it right. So yes, I echo that point that there are some fantastic resources on, Common Sense Media has a great curriculum on digital citizenship, and really making digital citizenship things like having a healthy media balance, digital footprint, hate speech online, really making that a core part of curriculum in schools. The other point that I would emphasize is the importance of bystanders. This is something that has gotten more attention in the last 5 years. And, we know that bystanders in experiences online and social media can either really quickly amplify a difficult experience or can be a force for de-escalating something that's intense or finding help. And so finding ways to support a healthy bystander culture in schools. Some of the things that we know, and this actually came up in the film, is that we know that often it might be older adolescents who have a little bit of distance from those difficult experiences on social media. So empowering and engaging older adolescents to feel comfortable intervening online, exploring some of the moral and social justice motivations for intervening online. Things like empathy training also might be promising approaches to supporting bystander intervention, and just supporting that social, emotional, educational experiences around attuning to relationships, and spotting when a young person is having difficulty among peers.
Excellent. I did love in the film how Sally asked, is there a point at which social media just didn't become as relevant or important? And, you kind of capture that in what you're saying, that may be the point at which, they can be change makers around this to help influence younger students. Connor, I'm curious from your perspective on this question, what do you think schools can do to help young people, students, become better citizens on social media? They may not necessarily want to hear from their teachers about this, but what are your thoughts?
Yes, I was very fortunate, and I grew up in a time where computers were it was there. They've always been there. And social media has always been there for me. And I think that's a weird perspective of my generation that other generations don't fully grasp. I was the first class that had an email in my our school email domain, and I was the first class that really we used technology, and there was a set curriculum both on digital fluency as well as digital citizenship. And so we had those programs, and those programs are very, very important. But I think another huge piece that like schools can like take, if someone can take anything from my perspective, it's understanding that like social media is not going anywhere. It's kind of really cemented its place in our society, and it's really becoming a thing. Like it is a thing that's a huge part of students' lives now. I know you can see it in like little statistics of like youth nowadays, like 4 to 7 or something, about how so many of them now like want to be, instead of wanting to be actors or movie stars, people want to be social media influencers. Like you can see how much social media is becoming such a huge part of students' lives. And so schools like need to understand that it's not going anywhere, and it's going to become a part of students' lives, and trying to fight that does no good. It's better to kind of surrender to the beast itself. And then that is when you can teach students how to be good citizens online. That is when you can really work with students and show not that you're fighting, not that you're pulling. No, don't use Instagram. Don't go on TikTok. Like these are bad things. That pulling away and that fighting tends to lead to a disconnect and a distrust in these people. So if educators, and as an education major myself, like I know I am just starting to understand the beast of like how much are put on teachers' plates. So understanding like when teachers become empathetic to it and like surrender to it and integrate it. I think integration is a huge part, like integrating it into classrooms, not having so much. I mean, obviously there are like set curriculums, but also just integrating little bits here and there, integrating technology and integrating social media use and integrating that into a classroom teaches students how to use it, not correctly use it in a better way. And this integration, and is when we have integration as well as blanking on the word, but like knowledge of like it's not going anywhere. And when schools stop fighting social media and start accepting that it is a thing in students' lives, that is when real change happens. And that's when students can finally start to learn what it means to be a good citizen online.
I love it. Thanks, Connor. And I am so heartened to hear that you are going into the field of education. So I imagine that you will be coming back to teach some of this to your students from that unique perspective of this always being a part of your life. And I love that idea that rather than rejecting and kind of, putting it into the bad category, educators really do need to embrace social media and maybe even kind of leverage some of the benefits of it in their own teaching so that they can model and effectively teach about the value of social media and how to be a good citizen. Brianna or Cami, anything to add on that question about what schools can do to become better citizens, to help students become better citizens on social media?
Yeah, I would just add that I definitely agree with what Connor was saying, that social media and technology are here to stay. So thinking about what's the best way we can utilize it to help promote like healthy coping and healthy usage among students. And also empowering students, to be the peer leaders. Some of the most successful suicide prevention programs for youth are ones where peers are going out and educating their fellow youth. So having them encourage other students to not engage in behavior like sexting or other kinds of things that might be risky on social media. And also just empowering them to check in with their friends if they post something alarming, not just ignore it or brush it under the rug. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Brianna. And Cami, anything to add here?
Everything that was shared is brilliant. I completely agree, and I echo that. I would add a piece, I think, as a parent to a kid who has an electronic device, and we're testing the waters. He's a 5th grader, and we're testing the usage of his phone before he goes to middle school and has a little bit more responsibility. So it's more apparent in my world now more than ever. But I don't know if parents quite understand the pressure that our students face online. And I feel sometimes when we have conversations about the needs of what students experience online, that many caregivers and parents are apathetic or empathetic to understanding that realm, because like me, did not grow up in the digital age. And so there's this huge disconnect between understanding how that affects your student, how that affects their mental health, and then having real honest discourse about how to create that safe environment at home where students can have those conversations with their caregivers. Because so often than not, I feel like I can only do so much. I can listen, I can be supportive, I can get the services that the student needs, but there's that missing piece, and that missing piece is their parents being involved, that their caregivers understand, because you're right, they don't leave. This problem doesn't leave them when they go home. So having caregivers having an understanding of what their student faces online and to be able to combat that from the home setting, I think is essential too.
Yeah, I love it.
Could I add something to that?
Please, Caitlin. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Just because I think Cami hit on a really important point that we've seen in the research literature in terms of, thinking about how parents can support young people to have healthy lives online and on social media, because certainly, as Connor said, it is not going anywhere. This is a fixed part of young people's lives and will continue. And that is that, really what Cami is talking about is having navigating how to use social media in the context of a close parent relationship. And this is kind of as opposed to trying to have really hard rules of, parental controls and, not allowed to use blanket rules around not having a phone or not using certain sites. What we know is that young people, the technology changes so quickly that young people are very good at getting around these hard rules for those of us who are older and just don't understand the technology as well. And so having that trial period as a young person is coming into their digital life, so to speak, and being able to have, explore the use together, explore what platforms feel good. If something happens on social media at a younger age, really being able to have the space to talk about it, as opposed to really coming at it from a more disciplinarian approach, seems to have better outcomes for young people in terms of finding that healthy balance for how to use social media.
Yeah, that makes great sense. And interestingly in the film, I recall Connor saying, when his own parent would say, well, is something wrong or is anything going on, and many of the students resonated with this. It was like, oh, stop, and if you mention anything about something's wrong, then it becomes kind of a big deal. So students shy away from that. So, it is important to not only have multiple adults where you create that safe space to talk in case the parent is not the one on that day, but also figure out a way to navigate those conversations early so that we're not waiting for that, late teen years where young people are really individuating from their parents, and start the conversations early, as you said, Cami and Caitlin. We have a question from the audience, which is, and we encourage questions from the audience in the chat box, so please feel encouraged to send them in. One question is, how has the heavy reliance on online communication and learning during the pandemic impacted this issue, for better and for worse? So we know our young people are spending more hours online in most cases than before. And frankly, a lot of parents are juggling many more things and may not be able to monitor in the same way. And so thoughts on how this reliance on online communication has impacted well-being and kind of the role of social media in young people's mental health. And anyone, feel free to jump in here.
I can speak on this really like a quick, fun little bit. I lost the tail end of my senior year because of COVID, and I was pushed online. So my schooling was online, and it definitely was probably not for the better at first. I think a lot of things went into shambles, and I feel like everything was just such a crazy time for everyone, especially educators trying to be as effective as they could. And I know my dad is a teacher, and he told me a huge part is it feels like being a first-year teacher all over again, because you have to like figure out and work through things, and it's become such a hard time. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's become such a hard thing for educators at the beginning, but I know Now, from a student's perspective, I just did my first full year of college, and I think it's really helping things for the better. I think now that both a more older audience and now educators who once didn't embrace technology now kind of had to, and they had to embrace this. And now I think a lot of my classes are getting a lot better at integrating technology. And I think, especially talking to some of my high school friends, it's become a good thing for them too, because just like I brought up, and all the other women brought up as well, that I'm so sorry, I'm very flustered. A huge part is once it's integrated into classrooms, students, it becomes less of this little hidden thing that we just do when we're home and sitting in our rooms, and it becomes more of a public thing. And it's becoming this public thing, and it's because of kind of COVID, it's being pushed to the public forefront. And it's a little bit harder, I think, for students to hide things. And it's your digital personality, because now that's sometimes how people meet you. I have friends, which is kind of a weird thing to think about. I have friends that have only known me online. I have friends that I've met through social media, and I have friends that have only known me through FaceTiming and video chats and stuff like that. So your online presence is now becoming such a public part of you that it's harder for kids to hide. At least that's what I've experienced.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate how you kind of found that silver lining, right? It's easy to focus on kind of the negative impact of all of this online communication and distance learning and so forth. But I agree that one of the benefits could be that for those of us who are older, right, the older folk who may have been either scared of, technology in certain ways or social media, or hadn't fully integrated it into our teaching, this perhaps has presented an opportunity for people to speak more about and understand how valuable technology can be, but also just the nuances of technology. So thank you for that perspective, Connor. And Cami, I think you had something to say here.
I am so glad that Connor had a great experience with electronic devices and going digital, because it seemed as if the exact opposite happened with my high school students. And so we were not one-to-one, and we were able to go one-to-one with CARES money. And I don't know if our students were ready for the one-to-one. I don't know if I was ready for one-to-one, but when it happened, it was great, because it allowed for us to teach in whatever model our district was going to implement for COVID. And we were ready, and I felt prepared. But I noticed when our students came, and even though they have the computer and they've got the technology, there is just an easier way to disconnect. It's an easier way to check out. It's an easier way to be apathetic. It's just so, I feel like they can hide behind the screen. And so because of that, classroom discussion, getting them involved, having them feel empathy. And as a social studies teacher, I teach a lot about humans and how we can connect, and the history of that, and why you should care, and why it's relevant to you, and to just get them to care about things that are happening in their world, unless it's specifically applied to them. I couldn't get them to buy in, where in years past, they would have drank the Kool-Aid. They would have been totally involved. They would have been, hanging from the rafters with excitement. And I didn't feel that this year. And I know that part of that is me embracing what this new realm, this new scope of education is going to look like, with being, tech driven and having devices. But I've noticed just in the classroom participation, connecting with the material, caring about the material, those being real deficits that worry me, because those are things that connect us as people. Those are things that connect me to my craft. And I'm worried that that's changing the craft. I didn't sign up for that. I signed up for the connectedness with humans. And I think the computer has made it easier for students to hide, and to hide their problems, to hide their emotions through the screen.
Yeah, I think, right, there's a lot of discussion happening around going back to the status quo of education, and, How can we leverage some of the innovation and lessons learned through technology, but also return to some of that connectedness? I want to shift us a little bit to think, beyond mental health, to also include, a major topic of this film was suicide risk and the role of social media, but also the role of schools in preventing suicide risk directly. And so I want to ask each of you your thoughts on what you would suggest schools can do to better support their students with respect to suicide risk. So what can schools do? How can we support our schools to prevent suicide and reduce suicide risk? So I'll maybe start with Brianna, since this is certainly your area of expertise.
Yeah. So it's definitely, there's definitely a lot to do, and especially with COVID and schools going to this remote digital format, that complicated things. But I think oftentimes we see a lot of schools reacting to the issue, reacting to suicide. So I think one of the best things for schools to do is to be proactive and set up a plan that will incorporate preventing suicide, what to do if you need to intervene with a student who might be at risk. So educating teachers and families about suicide risk factors and warning signs, and then also having a plan for postvention or interventions after a death by suicide. Because a lot of times when things happen or it comes up that someone might be thinking about suicide, we scramble. It's definitely very easy to just kind of have a mini panic attack, but having a plan in place with roles and responsibilities, everyone will know their limited role, but important role within suicide prevention. And also providing resources to the schools and to the community as how to navigate mental health care, how to connect with a behavioral health professional. Because that can be a really difficult situation, especially if you live in a rural area. It can be very hard to find a mental health professional. And also, thinking about upstream prevention, if your school doesn't have social emotional learning curriculum, incorporating that into either health courses or encouraging other topics to incorporate social emotional learning into their curriculum.
Thank you, Brianna. So I'm hearing both kind of upstream work as well as being planful and proactive about prevention and postvention, and really equipping educators and the school community with kind of pathways to get help from behavioral health providers in the school and community. So excellent suggestions. Anybody else want to jump in here in terms of the role of schools and how we can support schools in reducing suicide risk?
I can speak not in my researcher hat, but as with my background as a clinical social worker working in schools. One of the things that sometimes is a misperception about suicide is that talking about it or asking a young person about whether they have thought about suicide might increase the risk of suicide, but we know that that is not the case. And that, really understanding the three different dimensions of how serious to take suicidality, ideation, so whether someone is thinking about suicide, whether someone has a plan, and then whether someone has access to means to carry out that plan. And so, I certainly having strong social emotional programming in schools is a great idea. But if you are a person in someone's community and you're worried about them, then it's a good thing in the context of a close relationship to ask about how they're doing and whether they've considered suicide. And I do just also want to, of course, mention that in the case of Reed, sometimes these are things that might have been not planned. It sounds like in Reed's case, it may have been more just a kind of spontaneous decision. So these are very difficult things to prevent. It's even with kind of the best education and background, sometimes it is a spontaneous experience, and so prevention, that is a real challenge with prevention.
Yeah, I appreciate that point. So I'm curious, from all of your unique perspectives, what would you prioritize for youth well-being in school settings? So all the way from, what could we be doing for all students at that universal level to what could we be doing better in schools for students who may be struggling? Would someone like to start us off? Cami, thanks.
I think the social emotional learning component is very important. I didn't know what that was a couple of years ago until someone, our principal was like, "Oh, we're going to switch to this curriculum." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, I've been doing that for a while, so I guess I'm good." But I don't know if that is a nationwide conversation about social emotional learning and the importance of it, and understanding how essential I think it is to education today. And I don't know if we have the conversation about students' mental health. A lot of what I was taught in my teacher education was, curriculum based and content specific. And so oftentimes when students come to me, I feel ill-equipped I can listen. I'm a very good listener, I've been told, but I feel ill-equipped to help them other than let's go talk to a counselor. And oftentimes those counselors aren't necessarily in behavioral health. And so I would like to see behavioral health and mental health be just as important as the school nurse. And why can't that be a possibility in our schools to where those students get that support?
Wholeheartedly agree, Cami, with that sentiment. And the good news is there are many states where they are prioritizing social emotional learning standards for students. It's becoming part of their state scorecard or report card in some states. There's also states that have more recently passed legislation around requiring mental health literacy, K through 12 in the classroom. New York, Virginia, Florida are a few examples. So we are seeing those priorities really starting to be infused into the classroom. And there are more mental health literacy programs for educators that are coming out. I know one that is going to be free for all educators across the country that was federally funded and will be released out a week, I believe. It's called Classroom Wise. It's classroom well-being information and strategies for educators. So again, I think you're not alone, Cami, in wishing that this could be more infused into the school environment. And I really like how you laid out kind of some of those specific priorities for schools: social emotional learning, mental health literacy, and kind of raising mental health to the same bar, same standard as school health is at this point. So others, what are the priorities for schools in terms of supporting student well-being? Who'd like to jump in? Connor.
I think a huge point that was brought up in the film by one of my friends, Cameron, is a huge issue now is student culture. I think teachers are a lot better at things, but I know as a student, as an old high school student, and still it's very similar culture in my college, is students tend to trivialize it. It's very much becoming this thing where students, it's more of a joke than anything. It's being emphasized more in our society and in my generation. And so now a lot of people are taking it and as like turning it into a joke, and really kind of the phrase, "Oh, I want to kill myself," is now thrown around so much by high schoolers that you're losing students that are actually struggling. And so I think really focusing and working with your students to change school culture and changing and understanding that, yes, this is an issue, because I know a lot of high schoolers understand that it is an issue, but also understanding the severity of it and understanding how much students really need to take this seriously, because at the end of the day, it could be someone's life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about, one of the interesting things during the pandemic, people were talking about mental health more. And, you know, we heard that students are thinking about it more and talking about it more on social media. But then, Connor, you're right, that could also kind of like buffer the severity of it. And people might not take it as seriously. So I think definitely encouraging schools to help their students understand how serious it is and, you know, what to look out for. And there are other we also talk a lot about like risk and addressing risk factors, but strengthening resiliency and protective factors is also, I think, a great place for schools to play a role, because by doing that, you can really buffer the risk factors that students might be going through. And it's really impossible for us to know everything that they're seeing online and what they're going through online. So making sure that they're equipped with enough tools and resources to be able to either seek out help from someone else or know what to do if they are struggling and what kind of signs within themselves to look out for.
Yeah, and to that point, you know, go ahead.
I really agree with what has been said here. The role of social emotional learning in schools is so important, in making space in the classroom, across classes, in the school culture for social emotional learning. And just to kind of add to that, I think in the same bucket is having a trauma-informed system. You know, we know that coming out of COVID, there has been so much trauma that we as a culture have experienced, and then some students have experienced more than others, depending on their own personal situations, both with loss, being parts of marginalized groups that have experienced exceptional difficulty over the pandemic. And so really, first of all, just understanding, you know, I love this theme that has come out that, you know, small things that happen online can actually be really big, and actually they can be traumatic. And I think a lot of times we don't honor that, you know, think, oh, it's just cyberbullying or, you know, get over it. But it actually can be a traumatic event. And it doesn't have to happen more than once for it to be something that's traumatic. And so even just naming that, I think, can be really powerful. And then another thing that comes to mind is that, you know, I really agree with Connor that there can be incredibly positive experiences on social media. It's an important place for young people to connect with peers and friends and learn new things. And we do also know that social media use can really displace some of the activities that we know support thriving and well-being. So things like outdoor time, social connections, sleep, physical health. And so really having just kind of some basic space in schools for what makes us happy. You know, I think that there's, especially coming out of the pandemic, both talking about, you know, I don't think it's intuitive for many of us to understand just some of these basic self-care pieces that support happiness and thriving, and then even making space in, you know, during school time for physical health, for time outdoors, time in the classroom, just for students to connect with each other. It can be really meaningful. It's something I do in my own college classrooms, of just, you know, take the first 10 minutes and connect about something you did over the weekend that really inspired you. So these are small things, but really emphasizing that culture of health in schools.
I really appreciate the focus on creating trauma-informed environments. I think I may have a delay on my end, so I apologize if you're experiencing that delay, but I appreciate the focus not only on trauma-informed environments, but also, you know, just this idea that mental health is about supporting students who may be struggling, and about how can we create environments that actually foster growth and thriving in our students. I love the idea of community connectors in your classroom and opportunities for students to really kind of identify their sources of strength, their resilience, and things that help them thrive and grow in the classroom. That all falls under this umbrella of student mental health. We had an audience member ask a question here. They mentioned that the panelists discussed the importance of creating opportunities for students to discuss their mental health. And they're asking, what are concrete steps to do this? So any ideas?
I teach a class called Ethnic Perspectives, and the class is about cultural diversity. And so one of the first things that they do is they have to build a class norm list. And I don't call it rules, but it's just a norm list where I turn my back from the group so that they have to look at each other. They introduce themselves. I give them kind of a format of what to do. They introduce themselves and they build what is the stuff that they need for class. And then they build another list, and that list is everything that they need from me. So it's active listening, it's eye contact, it's no cell phone usage while we're in group. And those are things that then they will then hold each other accountable. So then we have conversations about what does holding someone accountable look like. When we don't call someone out, we want to call them in. We want to encourage them to be a part of the conversation. So how do we call someone into the circle? So from day one, students, I give choice to the students. Can you hear me?
Yep, it just was a delay there. I think we could hear everything, and I love that. I love that you've created this space where you actually kind of step away a bit so that your students can really define what they need in terms of the community culture and climate, and you know, set their own expectations, and then an accountability system. That's fabulous. So excellent. So I want to ask one final question. I feel like we could chat about this all evening, but one final question for you each to give your perspective on, and that is, what are the future priorities in research, policy, and practice to facilitate student mental health? And you can speak to any of those. We're certainly curious about what policy change needs to happen here, but from your lens, what are the future priorities in research, policy, and practice to facilitate student mental health? Who would like to start?
I can speak really fast. I'm just a student, so I'm not as brilliant as these ladies are when it comes to policy, so I can talk really quick about practice. But I think one of the biggest things is just like what Cami was talking about, making sure that holding students accountable and talking about that accountability piece is such a big piece, and getting students to stand up and starting to talk and creating those conversations and creating platforms for conversations. Because as both a student and someone that's worked with students, a huge thing that I love is what comes up out of conversations, and once you create a safe place, the amazing things that students will bring to you and the heart-wrenching things that students can bring to you. And creating that environment, I think, is so important. And I'm glad to hear that so many educators are doing it. I had some amazing teachers, and I think that's the biggest piece when it comes to talking about mental health as well as suicide prevention and suicide. Because I know once you create this conversation, this place that you can have this safe conversation, that's when students can start talking about their issues, talking about things that they've experienced online, and then they feel valued. And I think students feeling valued is so important.
That's great. And Connor, don't undersell yourself, because everything you just said that has implications for practice also has policy implications, right? There can be school level, district, and even state level policy that influences whether schools can create safe spaces for students to talk about mental health. So excellent point. Thank you. Cami, would you like to go next? What future priorities should there be in research, policy, practice to facilitate student mental health?
I completely agree with Connor. Connor, you're an expert, and I cannot wait until you join me in this rewarding and challenging field. So keep up the good work. I want to continue to have those conversations and promote some opportunities, I think, for my district and my state. Living in Nebraska, we are maybe not as progressive in having these conversations as we should. And so I think making that a part of some of the changes that we are wanting to create for a better school culture and climate has got to be, at the forefront of what we do. So I would continue to push for us having those conversations and for us promoting social emotional learning, for us to promote digital literacy, for us to continue to have those open conversations, and for us to continue to talk with parents about the importance and the responsibility of electronic use.
Excellent. Thank you, Cami. Caitlin.
Yeah, I'll just quickly echo, actually, again, what Connor so wisely put forward. One of the things that shows up a lot in the spaces I occupy is this idea of adultism, where we assume that just by nature of being an adult, we have better ideas than young people. And it's really destructive, because the most powerful social movements in our country and social progress have actually come from young people. And so the policy implication that I would hope come out of this is young people are actually the experts in how social media and digital lives impact their mental health. And so structuring opportunities for young people to actually share decision-making power, raise their voice, but also actually help to make decisions about school policies and how experiences in the digital world are handled would be my top recommendation.
Excellent. Brianna?
Yeah, I would just add that something that I think is really difficult for me to grasp is how much information and resources are out there that schools and communities just aren't aware of. So one thing that I would definitely like to see change in the future is better awareness of all these resources and a better way of communicating to schools so that they can easily take the research and the policy and incorporate it into their school practice. And then, of course, like the state legislation pushing for them to require mental health and training, suicide prevention training for staff, as well as incorporating it into student curriculum. There is like model school policy examples that include like a really comprehensive suicide prevention plan, but also includes ways of being more inclusive, including with LGBTQ students and other marginalized groups. Yeah.
That's great, Brianna. Thank you. All fantastic package of policy recommendations that I would wish to get to your state and other states as they are thinking about how can they advance mental health, especially in this moment of global crisis and an anticipated increase in mental health impact for young people. So I'm going to ask each of you briefly, because we're almost at the top of the hour, to share a final thought. You've shared a lot of wisdom with us this evening, but just a final thought for the viewers. And I'm going to ask if we could start with Caitlin.
I think probably a big theme that's coming out of this is take young people's experiences online seriously, understand that they can be traumatic, and listen to those experiences.
Thank you. And thank you for modeling a brief but really valuable statement for us to take away. Brianna.
Yeah, I agree. Just making sure that we're incorporating the youth voice into all of these efforts and really trying to foster ways for youth to do things, kind of leading things, doing peer-led initiatives, because we know that youth are going to be more receptive to other youth, and they're more likely to go for help to their friends and other peers.
Excellent. Thanks, Brianna. Cami?
I think continuing having those honest conversations and being available and using your time and showing empathy to students in need and listening to them, validating their experiences is key.
Excellent. And in the spirit of really lifting up youth voice, Connor, if you could close us out with final words of wisdom and your final thought for the evening.
Yes, I think my biggest thought from this is don't undersell like your impact as well, because you guys keep talking about how much like students' voices are important, but also like teachers and educators knowing how much of an impact you have on students and how much you being open can save someone's life and can save someone's day. I have educators and teachers that honestly have made some of the biggest impact on my life, and so making sure and being open to students talking to you, because that is when change and that is when real magic happens, is when the students and educators listen to each other and respect each other. And that's when I think the most change can really happen.
What a beautiful way to close us out, Connor. Just reminding everyone that they have a role to play in really saving lives and promoting well-being and mental health for all young people. It's about the youth voice and about everybody else in the community. So thank you so very much to all four of you. And we really appreciate everybody listening this evening. Now go make some change in your communities and continue to support young people in the work that you do.